Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Roger Mudd in Washington. After the news summary, we take a closer look at Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, the Egyptian cleric whose followers are linked to terrorist attacks in the U.S. Then a report on tax breaks and promises. And finally, the Supreme Court's big decisions this year and what's ahead with Judge Ginsburg.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
A U.S. jet attacked an Iraqi anti-aircraft site in southern Iraq today. U.S. officials said the attack was provoked when Iraqi radar locked onto the plane. President Clinton told reporters at the White House not to read too much into the incident. He said it was standard rules of engagement for U.S. planes to take action when illuminated by Iraqi radar. The F-4G attack jet was flying with another Air Force plane over the no-fly zone in southern Iraq. Both returned safely to base. An Iraqi government statement said the plane had targeted an inactive anti-aircraft battery and one soldier was wounded. 3 days ago, the U.S. attacked Iraq's intelligence headquarters in Baghdad to retaliate for an alleged plot to assassinate former President Bush during his April visit to Kuwait. At a White House news conference today, President Clinton was asked whether he believes Saddam Hussein approved that plan.
Well, we believe the evidence clearly indicates that the bombing operation was authorized by the Iraqi government. And it is highly unusual in the experience of our people. Well, let me recast that. Our analysts have no experience of such an operation of that magnitude being authorized other than at the highest levels.
The president also said, given Iraq's conduct, it would be difficult to conceive of ever having normal relations with the regime of Saddam Hussein. Before he took office, Mr. Clinton had indicated normal ties might one day be possible. The U.S. sent an aircraft carrier through the Suez Canal today on its way to the Red Sea. The USS Theodore Roosevelt was dispatched after the U.S. attack on Iraq to beef up naval power in the region. The ship's warplanes are also expected to take part in enforcement of the no-fly zones over Iraq. A report prepared by the staff of a congressional committee says Iraq has reconstructed 80% of its military manufacturing capability since the Gulf War. Congressman Tom Lantos of California, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, said monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency and a UN Special Commission had not been able to stop Iraq's rearmament. He spoke about the report at a hearing this morning.
Despite the UN embargo, Iraq has succeeded in reinvigorating its clandestine procurement network, relying on known front companies in Jordan, France, and Germany to purchase critical items and spare parts for its weapons industry. Despite the UN trade embargo, Iraq continues to ship oil to Jordan and to Iran, using this money to feed its procurement network and to rebuild its weapons plants.
At the same hearing, Assistant Secretary of State Robert Gallucci, who was a UN weapons inspector in Iraq, said Iraq still poses a nuclear threat. He said Saddam Hussein is committed to rebuilding a nuclear weapons program and has the basic industrial capability to do so. Roger? Finally tonight, a look at Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, the radical Muslim cleric suspected of inciting terrorism on 2 continents. His name has been associated with many of those accused in last week's plot to bomb the United Nations and other New York targets. Sheikh Rahman also has ties to the men charged with bombing the World Trade Center in February. And indeed, law enforcement officials say the Blind Sheikh is himself under suspicion. Tonight we examine what role the Sheikh is playing and how the United States should treat him. 1982, Sheikh Rahman was charged in connection with the murder of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Egyptian officials said Rahman provided the inspiration and the order to kill Sadat as part of his call for Islamic revolution. But he was acquitted. although a number of his followers charged in that case were convicted and executed. That encounter with the law, followed by acquittal, would set a pattern for the years that followed. The Sheikh was later charged with inciting a series of riots in Egypt that left hundreds dead, but in each case was acquitted. Rahman is still officially wanted in Egypt on related charges and is now being tried in absentia. In 1990, despite being named by the State Department as a suspected terrorist, the 55-year-old Sheikh traveled to the U.S. on a visa granted by the Sudanese government. He settled in Jersey City, New Jersey. While here, Rahman established a mosque and also preached in several Brooklyn mosques. As a religious worker, he was able to obtain a green card from the Immigration and Naturalization Service. When the INS later tried to revoke his card, he applied for asylum, and that case is pending. He continued to call for Islamic revolution, extending the targets of his preachings to the U.S. One of his followers, El Said Nosser, was convicted on charges relating to the 1990 killing of Rabbi Meir Kahane, founder of the militant Jewish Defense League. 5 of the 7 suspects in the World Trade Center bombing are believed to have worshipped at Rahman's mosque. So are 7 of the 8 men accused last week of planning to bomb the United Nations, 2 of New York's major tunnels, and the Manhattan Federal Office Building. The man identified as the informer in that case, Ahmad Salem, has been a translator and bodyguard for the Sheikh. We have 5 views on Sheikh Rahman. Peg TYRE is a reporter for New York Newsday who's been covering the story. FOUAD AJAMI is a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Strategic and International Studies. Graham Fuller is a senior political scientist with the RAND Corporation. He's the former chief Middle East analyst for the CIA. Judith Miller has covered the Middle East for the New York Times for the past 15 years. She's currently on leave, working on her 2nd book about the region. Ghazi KHANKAN is president of the National Council on Islamic Affairs. He's the producer of a radio show called Voice of Islam. I'd like to ask each of you, starting with you, Mr. KHANKAN, what do you believe Sheikh Rahman is trying to do now in his life? What is his goal?
Like any religious people, he's preaching what he learned in school. And by the way, you mentioned something that he established a mosque. He did not establish that mosque. That mosque was there when he came. He just preached in it, and like any sheikh would preach anywhere else. And the word sheikh, if I may say, is an Arabic term which means an elder person who is respected for his knowledge. In this case, he is a graduate of Al-Azhar University with a PhD in Islamic law and so on. And what he's doing, he's enjoying the freedom that America gives to anybody using the First Amendment, freedom of speech. And that's exactly what we are all doing here.
FOUAD AJAMI, what do you think Sheikh Rahman's goal is? What is his purpose?
Well, to call Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman a preacher is in effect to say that, well, actually Savonarola was just a regular man of the church. Omar Abdurrahman is a rebel. Omar Abdurrahman is a man who genuinely believes in his own cause. And my interest in him really is not so much his American incarnation. I didn't follow that trail. My interest in him began when I was looking at the Sadat assassination. And this is really, if you take a look at his trail, this is a man who has a talent for walking away from the scene of the accident. I mean, you can't really pin anything on him because he really doesn't pull the trigger. What he ends up doing, in effect, is giving the justification for younger men who take it upon themselves to do all kinds of daring deeds. And so in 1981, when Sadat was assassinated, Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman provided, if you will, the writ for tyrannicide. He in effect declared Sadat a tyrant. He declared him an unbeliever. And then he let other people draw their own conclusions. So even though the state in Egypt wanted to nail him for the murder of Sadat, and even though he was the chief defendant of 300 people who were in effect singled out by the prosecutor couldn't really nail him. And the prosecutor didn't, and that's my thesis, because in effect the Egyptian state didn't really want to do it. Because Hosni Mubarak was there on the reviewing stand when Sadat was killed, and he wanted to bring the matter to an end. So then Omar Abdurrahman walked away from it, and he reincarnates again in America in the 1990s. And it's ironic that he ends up in America in the very same state that he loathes, and that he, in effect, which is the subject of many of his sermons.
But what is his purpose now? What is his goal now?
Well, I think, my own sense is that Omar Abdurrahman, again, is committed, and he has made no secret of it. he would like to bring the Egyptian state down. And he sees himself, I really believe in this, he sees himself as a kind of Egyptian Khomeini. And just as Khomeini sat in Paris in a suburb and brought down the Shah, Omar Abdurrahman has fantasies along this line. So a fight for Egypt is being played out. And it's being played out in Jersey City and Yonkers and New York. And Omar Abdurrahman is a major participant in this. And he thinks what he wants to do is to snap the link between the US and the Egyptians. The Egyptian regime is our client. We are committed to Egypt's security. $2 billion a year of our aid goes to Egypt. And he believes that it's from here that you can wage the good fight against the Egyptian regime of Hosni Mubarak.
Do you agree with that, Judith Miller?
I totally agree with it. And I also think to call Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman representative of Islam is to really do an injustice to one of the world's great religions. A man who says to his acolytes, strike hard, destroy the descendants of apes and monkeys, destroy the Zionists, the communists, and the imperialists who feed at the trough. I mean, I think this man is a fanatic. I think he has a political agenda. And I think, in part, that it was the incompetence of the Immigration Service that permitted him to come in here, and perhaps Egypt's reluctance, as FOUAD pointed out, to bring him back to Egypt, to make him stand trial there. Egypt didn't want him to be a martyr. Much better to let the Americans watch him. I think at this point he's a very dangerous man and certainly not representative of Islam.
Do you think he's a dangerous man, Graham Fuller?
I think he's performing a very negative role in staying in the United States. Definitely, the majority of American Muslims, I think, would be strongly opposed to his message, to his style. I think American Muslims generally see him as smearing the community, damaging the community's own image with goals that, by and large, I would guess 99% of them do not share. The question is, what can be done with him? If he is in this country as in some legal form of status and has not technically violated the law, I think it's going to be very difficult to remove him. But his position here, his role in the United States, I think is quite different than it would be in Egypt, where he would be in a position to talk to a very broad, unhappy, in many ways alienated mass of the population that is far more responsive to this kind of a message than any American Muslim community would be here.
Mr. KHANKAN, do you agree that that is what Sheikh Rahman's goal is basically to overthrow the Egyptian state and create a more fundamentalist Islamic state there?
I believe we should really go into some background. The Muslim people in the Middle East and all over the world have really been frustrated, they have been defeated, they have been occupied by colonialism, they have been occupied by Zionism, they have been they are being killed in Bosnia and in Somalia and so on. And their government don't seem to be able to do anything about it. And what he is really saying, he's just expressing the frustration of many people, although it is against Islamic principles what he is preaching. But there are single people who have been hurt by, whether it's British or French colonialism or Israeli occupation of Palestine, or by seeing their Bosnian colleagues being killed by a Christian Serb government, and yet they see the West doing nothing about it. They punish Somali leader, they punish an Iraqi leader, they punish, yet there are UN resolutions against Israel and the US does nothing about it. There are resolutions against Serbs and the US does nothing about it. So there is a frustration that is growing and brewing. And he gets ears that will listen.
But you do not think that he is deliberately fomenting revolution by force in Egypt or terrorism in this country. He's not deliberately inciting other people to violence?
He is saying what he's definitely inciting people, yes, but he is saying it in such a way that is playing into the frustration of the majority of the people. That, look, we have been defeated, we have been killed, we have been massacred, the women are being raped in Bosnia, and the West is doing nothing about it. And yet when it comes to Iraq or to Somalia and so on, boom, 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 we go and attack, and double standard. People are frustrated, they don't know what to do.
FOUAD AJAMI mentioned, Judith Miller, FOUAD AJAMI mentioned the Khomeini analogy, which the Sheikh, you said, may fantasize about. How importantly does Rahman rank as a religious leader, and is it total fantasy for him to think of himself as another Khomeini?
I think it's total fantasy. I mean, the comparisons are just ludicrous. Khomeini, no matter what one thinks of what he did as the leader of Iran, was a great scholar, was a leading Islamic thinker for many, many years. With all due respect to what Ghazi said, really, Sheikh Omar Abdul-Rahman was kind of a second-rater. He taught out in the sticks. He didn't represent anybody. He never wrote a book that was of importance. I mean, FOUAD, do you agree with that? I just think that the man has delusions. And moreover, my sense of what's happening in Egypt is that these bombings that have now been targeted at ordinary Egyptians have really turned a lot of Egyptian people against the kind of tactics that Omar Abdul-Rahman has been preaching. I think that
so he does not have, the soil is not ripe the way it was for Khomeini in Iran?
Not at all.
In Egypt?
These are two very different countries, one in which the Egyptian state is enormously powerful. Egyptians are very religious, but I don't believe they're fanatical, and they're not particularly militant. And I don't think that they would ever follow a man like Omar Abdul-Rahman. I don't think that's the real choice. That's a straw issue.
Graham Fuller, from what you said before, do you think the reason the Sheikh is being kept here, or is being permitted to stay here, apart from the legal steps, which we'll come to in a moment, which he's going through, is because there's some understanding between the U.S. government and Mubarak's government that it's better to have him here than there?
No, I find it very difficult to think that there would be that kind of a compact between the two governments. I mean, basically, the law takes its own course here. He has a legal case either to make, it will be made or not made. I find it difficult to think of any kind of collusion. But the problem is, you see, in the Middle East itself, there is a great degree of paranoia about what this man means and why he is in the United States. There's tremendous respect for the United States' capabilities, its intelligence, its ability to do things far in excess of reality, so that when a guy like this gets a visa, when he comes to the United States, when he stays here, when he seems to preach against the Egyptian government, when he appears on CNN, or when he's the subject of indeed a program like this at great length, which is then shown in Egypt, lots and lots of Egyptians feel that somehow this is an effort by the United States to cultivate a new Khomeini, but this time somebody who is in our pockets. There have even been stories suggesting that because he played ball, that he maybe played ball with the United States in supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, and therefore the U.S. government owes him one and is trying to help him out or pay him back as a result of all of this. These kinds of ideas are feeding.
I read somewhere that Mubarak himself had suspicions that he was a CIA employee or on the payroll.
Mubarak said that explicitly, although the very next day the Egyptian government withdrew, said that he was misunderstood.
Do you? Do you
suspicions about Khomeini, incidentally, to show you how?
Did he really? Do you agree with Graham Fuller that there is probably no deal between the United States and Egypt to keep the Sheikh here?
Absolutely not. I mean, I don't think there's any. I think it was a case of total bureaucratic bungling and incompetence. Here's a man who has a long rap sheet on him in Cairo. He goes right next door to Khartoum in the Sudan. He lives in the Sudan, but he finds life in the Sudan intolerable. Why? Well, because the phones don't work. He can't call his followers in Egypt. He comes to Jersey City and you launch the revolution, you fight the good fight from afar. So I think it's really basically, it was a case of bureaucratic bungling on the part of the U.S. government.
Let's come now to the events here recently, the World Trade Center bombing and then the plot that was uncovered last week to bomb the United Nations and so on. Peg Tyre, how closely can the authorities link Sheikh Rahman to those events?
Well, I've been told that there is a taped conversation between the Omar and one of the conspirators, the alleged conspirators, in which he's speaking about an event. What the event is a little unclear. So I think that they believe that they have one of his closest associates who is their informant. I think that they have him very tightly, but not enough to, it would seem, not enough to arrest him.
Uh-huh. And what are the steps now in the deportation proceedings and the appeals against that? Describe where we are in that process and what might happen to him.
Well, he's been, as far as I understand, been denied political asylum. He is been ruled deportable. He then is appealing to, I think it's called the Board of Immigration Appeals. They'll make a ruling within between 4 months and a year. The U.S. government has asked that that process be speeded up. At that point, he can take it to a district court. If it's a decision that goes against him, he can take it into the district court, again to the Court of Appeals. It can take 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, according to lawyers who I've talked to, immigration lawyers.
What do you understand of the Sheikh's legal status here and the prospects of his being deported or his being permitted to stay?
I think he, like any other person who claims asylum, will have his day in court, and really the media should not play up this man and make him like a Khomeini, as FOUAD said. He's not really that type. The media seems to have become the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor at the same time. Let's give the man his day in court. I wish he would be here so you can question him directly.
We've asked him. Yeah.
I appeal to him in Arabic, رجاء اقبل دعوة Mr. Lehrer, because it is really important.
MacNeil.
And MacNeil.
Whichever.
Lehrer, MacNeil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is important for he's being, so many stories have been told about him. Let's listen to him speak directly, hopefully.
Hasn't he had enough chance to get his point of view across? I mean, he goes on CNN and he calls for the overthrow of the Egyptian government on CNN. I think we've heard a fair amount from him.
We hear bits and bytes here and there, but not a full questioning period, I think, is necessary.
Let me come back to his status here now and what, if anything, the U.S. government should do to, on grounds that, as Mr. Fuller said, he may be dangerous. What should the U.S. government, the Clinton administration, do? Let the legal proceedings on his appeal from deportation take its course, or say he's dangerous and we have to do something about it?
Well, I'm not really a man of the law. I mean, I have, I think my interest.
But you must have an opinion on it.
My sense of it, look, this is a very dangerous character, and I mean, to hark back to his old trail. This is a man who in 1981 was found with gold that was taken from Coptic jewelers who were killed and raided in Egypt and so on. I mean, I think that, but you know, here we are. I mean, we are here in 1993. This is a liberal society. This man knows the rules and knows the ropes of it. He has an appeal pending, and I'm afraid we will have to just wait to the tail end of this.
Graham Fuller, what is your opinion on this?
Well, the difficulty is really what this is going to mean to the Egyptian government if he goes back. I agree that this man is not a Khomeini. He does not have a fine vision of, or indeed a true vision at all of any political sophistication. The problem is that Egypt itself is in relatively moving towards an explosive situation, I would say, over the longer run. And it's where you have a government and a society in which there is really no opposition left now due to the polarization of the situation. There's no opposition left except the Islamic fundamentalists. And this leaves really very little alternative to the public, either going with the government or going with the fundamentalists that I would say a majority doesn't like. But it's a very unhealthy situation. And the return of a man like this, although no Khomeini, he will not come back in and triumph or anything like that, it's yet just another headache to a government that I fear is not handling as deftly as it could the opportunity to play off a broad gauge of opposition one against another to deflate the Islamists themselves.
Well, therefore, Judith Miller, is it in the United States' interest to keep him here?
Well, it's just a point of fact. I think the last place in the world that Omar Abdul Rahman is going to go is Egypt. Number one, Egypt hasn't asked for his extradition. Number two, Omar Abdul Rahman gets to choose under our proceedings where he goes, because we are not deporting him, we are attempting to exclude him, which means tomorrow he can get on a plane and go to the Sudan. So I think that if there is some question about whether or not he is a danger to the public or poses a danger to the public while the law is being given a chance to judge his suitability here, that perhaps we ought to consider Senator D'Amato's plea to at least ensure public safety by incarcerating him, which can be done under the law. I guess that's up to Janet Reno to decide. But I think if there's any question at all, and now he's been connected with 2 terrorist attempts, one successful, one not, perhaps that ought to be considered.
Connected, but still in an abstract sense. There is still
he has
no.
not been charged with
We've
anything.
we've just heard that there is there's no provable link between him and these things. What has Senator D'Amato, who was claimed to be, reported to be one of the targets of the assassination attempts plotted by these people who were arrested last week, what is he seeking to do?
Well, as I understand it, under the law, he can be incarcerated while his appeals are he's seeking an appeal, and D'Amato has actually called for him to be put in prison while this is going on, and it's not an uncommon thing. There's jails full of people who are waiting for their immigration status to be cleared up. I guess the question is, what are the repercussions here in New York if he is put in jail?
Repercussions like what?
Well, certainly he has people who he's influencing in such a way that they feel comfortable enough to make a gigantic bomb and blow up the Holland Tunnel, or that's their plan. I guess there's some question as to whether putting him in jail would make him more of a martyr figure to those followers.
What would be the reaction among in the Islamic community in the New York area if he were incarcerated?
I think we are really blowing the thing up more than what it is. Let's give the man a chance in his court and see whether he is guilty or not. The First Amendment, the Republic is so strong that the speech of one single man is not going to create havoc. The Republic is going to stay here. We're going to stay for many, many years after he's gone. But we should not be afraid of this single man. Let him speak, so what?
You think we shouldn't be afraid of this single man?
No, we shouldn't be afraid of prosecuting him.
Of course
not. If this man is linked to a bomb that killed several people, if this man is linked to a conspiracy that we intercepted, if this man is linked to subverting an allied government that we care about, in effect, there's enough evidence on him. See, we don't know. You're exactly right. It's really Janet Reno's call. We're not lawyers, but it is somewhat. I mean, you do have on display, I think, in the Omar Abdurrahman case, the vulnerability of a great liberal society, that even its enemies are welcomed, and even its enemies can abuse its rules and can abuse its hospitality. I mean, here is this man who was preaching in Asyut, preaching violence, and the evidence on him there in Egypt is overwhelming. I mean, read the transcripts of the Egyptian police. The Egyptian government is amazingly proficient in the production of documents. I've read these documents. They're incredible. There is no doubt in my mind as to the kind of man Omar Abdurrahman is and the kind of things he's been doing.
Well,
If I could...
I'm awfully sorry to cut you off, Mr. Fuller, but that is the end of our time. So I'll thank you and all the rest here for joining us.